We're going to take on some advanced information about drivers now. More specifically, I'm going to look at the various tabs in the device manager and talk about what we can do with them and what's available to us. If I look at the device manager that we've seen before, oops, that's not it. Let's try that again. The device manager, you can see that I have various classes, things like monitors and disk drives, the firmware of the machine, keyboards, and so on. And the drivers for these things are inside of this. So, for example, let's go to display adapters. I've only got one display adapter that's showing. It's refreshing right there. Why is it refreshing so often? That's silly. If I go to DVD and CDs, I've got different drivers. This one's for my DVD down here, and this is a Blu-ray driver, I believe. So I have two different drivers in this particular category. Now, if I drill down into these drivers, so for example, I'm going to right-click this and go to Properties, I'm going to get a window with several tabs here. Now, this one has 4 different tabs, 1, 2, 3, 5 different tabs, but they don't all have the same tab. So let's choose another one. Let me see. I'll go down to Monitors here. And in this one, I've only got 4 tabs. I'll go down to Keyboard. This is the one I actually use in the notes. And I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tabs in that one. But let's look at this one, the USB bus driver here. And I'll click Properties. I got a whole bunch of them here. I got 6 different tabs in this particular one. And there are some others that could show up too. Let's go through what some of these tabs are. And I will use the same thing I use in the notes. I'll use the keyboard as an example. The first tab is the General tab, and here I can simply tell, well, what is this device? So it's a keyboard device. The manufacturer, it doesn't really know. It's just a generic keyboard. And then the location, well, it's on a USB, so I've got my keyboard plugged in by USB. Very simple, quick information about this particular driver. On the driver tab, I have a little bit more information. The driver itself, now this is more about the device, this is about the driver. So the driver is a Microsoft driver, and I can see the date and the version in case I see another driver, and I can compare to make sure it's later than this particular one. This is a signed driver. It's signed by Microsoft. We've talked about that a little bit in the past. All kernel level drivers, and I'm not going to talk about the difference between kernel level and user level drivers, but all kernel level drivers must be signed by Microsoft to install. And this one indeed is. Now let's look at some of these things down here. The driver details actually tells me the actual driver files that are used by this particular keyboard. And you notice that these are in the drivers folder. So let's talk about that a little bit more. We've looked at this a little in the past. In the C drive, under Windows, and then System 32, I have Driver Store. Now this is where all the drivers, all the Microsoft drivers that are already in Windows and ready to use exist. And then remember we said that Plug and Play moves them from, or copies them from the driver store to the drivers folder, and this is where the actual drivers that are in use exist. There are many, many more drivers in the driver store, but these are the ones that are actually installed and in use. Let's go back to our notes here, and you can see that if I can find where I left off. Oh, not the notes. This is where I wanted to go back to. Go back to Properties. You'll see that these are in the drivers folder, so these are currently in use, and there's the exact, in case I have a problem, I know exactly which file to get rid of if I really wanted to blow that away out of the drivers directory. Now it doesn't mean it'll leave the computer, it may still be in driver store, but at least it would uninstall it here. And then some more information about the provider and so on. The update driver is used if I want to look for updates for this particular driver. If I know where it is on a file system, for example, I can browse to that, or I can just say search automatically. This doesn't actually work very often, but it will look at Windows Update as well as throughout your file system to see if there is a later driver available. Rollback driver is not available right now, and the reason it's not available is because I have not updated this driver. But if I did update to a later version, I could now roll it back. If I had problems, I can roll it back to the previous version of the driver so that I could fix those problems. I can disable a device, and what that means is I'm going to remove the driver from the registry so that it will not load that driver when I boot the machine. It won't take the driver files away, but it just won't load it and run it. So again, I can use that for troubleshooting, or if I uninstall it, it will actually take the file out of the driver store. It'll take it out of the device manager here. It'll just delete it from there. I should say take it out of the driver file, but it will not take, or folder, but it will not take it out of the driver store. But it will simply uninstall it, taking it out of the driver folder and out of the registry completely. Now, there is an option to totally get rid of it if you want when you uninstall it. The next one is the Details tab. This doesn't look like much, but it's actually quite interesting. We've seen this before. If I drop this down, I can see lots of different information about this particular driver. Tons and tons. I think there are 60-some different things that I can look at here. Here's again the driver version, or the hardware ID is the most interesting one. I can see that vendor ID and product ID numbers, and I can use those numbers, Google those numbers. I can say VID, I can type it just like this, VID underscore 04D9 and PID underscore 1605, and I could actually find the driver online for this particular device. If I don't happen to know, I don't have to look up the manufacturer and the model number and all that. I can just use this information to go out and directly find that driver using Google and download it. So that's really handy. Lots of other information here. And by the way, this information changes depending on the type of device that it is. The next one is events, and this tells me about, oops, let's click that again, events. This tells me about event logs that this particular driver has launched. And if I go down to view all events, it'll actually take me over to the event viewer where I can get more information about these events in the event viewer. All right. And I had a problem. For some reason, it didn't load the event viewer snap-in. Well, I don't know what happened there. I'm not going to try it again and keep harping on that one because we will talk about the event viewer later. It just didn't happen to work this time. Now I've got some other possible tabs here. For example, power management. This particular device may be subject to power settings that I make in Windows. Other devices would not have that tab. I could also go down, for example, to this one, the USB device that we looked at a little bit earlier, and I'll see a resources tab. The resources tab tells me about those where the memory locations are, the IRQs, and this one actually uses several IRQs for some reason, which is interesting. It does not have a DMA channel or I/O port associated with it, but it does use these other two resource types. And then there are some others, and if I poked around, I'd find them. I'm not going to take the time to poke around on all these right now, but there are a few other tabs that might come up once in a while, and I think I listed those down here in the notes. Let me see here. Did I? The resources tab, additional tabs. A region tab, for example, for DVD players, and a volume tab for drives and so forth. So that is there's quite a bit of information in the device manager, and if you get you learn to kind of read that and find your way around it, you can gain a ton of information about the device drivers as you need them.